Hi guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to this series, which is about graphic design for beginners and graphic design for visual artists, like photographers who are looking to increase their understanding of graphic design. If you haven't already seen my introduction to typography video, I'm gonna link that up here. I would pause this video, head over there, watch that introduction so you can get to know some of the language, and then head back over here and you can watch this one. But if you have already seen that one, then I would say grab a pen and paper and we can get on with this video. So today we are going to be talking about how you pair type and how you use different typefaces and fonts together. And we're also going to be talking about visual hierarchy when it comes to typography. The first thing to keep in mind for this video is we're going to be talking about two main themes, and they are contrast and balance. They are the keywords for this video. And another little disclaimer of sorts, these rules they're important to know, but rules are also made to be broken. So, once you know the rules, if you kind of want to use them in a different way or go against them, then that is absolutely fine. I would just say that these are more guidelines to be mindful of when you are working with type. You should always, as with anything in design, use your own judgment and the knowledge that you have, and hopefully that you will learn in this video, to make up your mind about how you use certain techniques. So I will put the timestamps for this video in the pinned comments so you guys can check them out, but we will be talking about what visual hierarchy is, tips for creating typographic hierarchy, and tips for pairing fonts. So what is visual hierarchy? So hierarchy refers to guiding the reader's eye, and we guide it to what is most important. It's the hierarchy of, this should be read first, and then this needs to be looked at, and then this needs to be looked at. And you create hierarchy visually by using different points and levels of emphasis. The whole point is to increase legibility and readability. So what are a few tips for creating typographic hierarchy? Firstly, and I will refer back to that keyword at the beginning of the video, you want to use contrast. If you're going to make a change, you need to make it big enough for it not to just be adding noise. If your change is only small, then the likelihood is you're going to add a little bit of noise to the design because the viewer's going to look at it and think, was that purposeful? Is that meant to be there? And it just kind of takes away from the design. So again, that relates back to balance. If you are going to use contrast, you want it to be enough contrast, but not too much contrast. And we will get onto that later in the video. You can also use size, weight, different typefaces, all of these things to create contrast in your design. And we're going to jump into Illustrator and I'm going to show you through a few artboards to describe that. So we've just jumped into Illustrator here, and you can see that I have got a artboard open where you have two bits of type. And if we look at this bit of type, you can see how you can't really differentiate between the two words. You don't know which one is the title, which one is the subtitle. And we're going to be exploring how you can kind of make that more obvious. So if we come over to this artboard, then you see that we're using size to guide the reader's eye. You can see that what I'm saying is you look here first, and then you look in here, and then you're looking to that smaller type there, and your eye naturally sees that bigger type first and reads that, despite the fact that it's at the bottom and usually you'd read top to bottom. Another great way to create hierarchy is using color, and just again using a little bit of contrast and differentiating between the other type. So when we look here, you straight away you see the darker shade of pink, and you look at that one first before you start reading the other examples. Again, positioning, if we set the type away from the majority of the rest of the type, then your eye is drawn down towards this section here. Cases is a good way to use it and create contrast. So we've got some upper case and some lower or mixed case down here. Weights, again, we are reading the readme bit first, and then we are moving on to the thinner type which says and then me. And in this example, we are using a mixture of all of these techniques because you are not refined to using just one of them. So as you can see, we've got a different typeface to the rest of the type. We have got the use of color to separate this subtitle, and size separating the body type from the subtitle. So when we're using size to create contrast, how do we know how big or small to make them? How do we know how much contrast is enough? So when I'm trying to find that perfect balance, I use two indicators. First of all, I use the golden ratio, and that refers to multiplying the point size of your type by the golden ratio, which I'll put on the screen, is 1.618. Then I just round that up to the nearest whole number. The other indicator is I'll just see what looks good. You can kind of make a judgment with your eyes. Sometimes the golden ratio, it doesn't look great, or it would look better a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller, and that's where your own personal judgment and your eye comes into things. But if you are struggling with kind of knowing how much contrast to use in terms of size, then the golden ratio is a good starting point. We're going to jump back into Illustrator now, and we are going to be talking about tips for pairing your type. Okay, so we've just jumped into Illustrator, and you can see on the screen that we have an example of using tracking to create hierarchy. Both of these typefaces are of the same family. I believe this is Montserrat. Yeah, there we go. And all we've done here is we have used a different weight, and we have increased the tracking within the typeface to create some contrast between this title and this body type. So tracking refers to adjusting the space between the letters uniformly, so across the whole word. Kerning refers to adjusting the space between just two letters within the word. And we can use tracking and kerning to create this contrast, which is really good when we are using just one typeface like we are here. So when we are pairing typefaces and fonts, this is a great example of when we should be using hierarchy. You want to utilize different weights and different sizes to your advantage. Okay, so the next tip we want to talk about is you want to avoid your typefaces clashing. So to do this, we want to ensure that we have enough contrast. If you look at the example on the screen now, you can see that using these two typefaces, it doesn't really work. There's not a obvious enough distinction between the two typefaces, and they just don't work well together. So that is because we are using two typefaces which are very similar. So where they're both sans serif, tall, chunky, like bold and big. This is, as a viewer, uncomfortable to look at because we can't really differentiate between the two bodies of text. This is another example of clashing where it's just a little bit more uncomfortable to read. This is two serif typefaces together. If you want to use serif and serif together, then a good idea is to use one typeface and two fonts. So here you can see that we've got Baskerville Italic as the title and Baskerville Regular for the body type. And this just helps to create a little bit of distinction and maintain that cohesion. But like I said earlier, it is about balance, and whilst you want to find contrast, you don't want to use too much contrast. So for example, using this script typeface for the title and this bold sans serif typeface for the body is a good example of how too much contrast don't really work together. This is because when you have too much contrast, it can sometimes interrupt or confuse the communication. And that is something that we spoke about in the last video when we did an introduction to typography. We spoke about how every typeface tells a message, and these messages that these two different typefaces are trying to communicate to the audience are too different to create a cohesive kind of communication. My next tip is to mix up using sans serif and serif typefaces to create kind of the ultimate contrast. So as you can see, this clear hierarchy is created by using this contrast. Generally speaking, you want to use a sans serif typeface for the title. It usually works best in this example. So here we are using this serif typeface for the body and a sans serif typeface for the title. Another tip is to use one typeface and two fonts. So similarly to when we were talking about, avoiding that clash between using two sans serif typefaces, you can do the same when you're using two serif typefaces. So here we're using Montserrat Bold and Montserrat Regular, and then Montserrat Bold Italic and Montserrat Regular. This ensures that they're working well together, but it creates enough contrast to differentiate between the different types. The next tip is to keep it minimal. You want to stick to one or two typefaces or fonts. And this is just to ensure that you're not overcomplicating your designs. If you do want to use a 3-font combo, then try and stick to using just the one typeface and the 2 fonts. So again, when we were talking about fixing that clashing, you can see here we've got one typeface, I believe this is Baskerville, and we are just using 2 different fonts. We're using it in an italic and it's a little bit smaller, and we're using it regular for the top title. And then in the body type here, we are using a sans serif typeface that contrasts this title typeface. Another little tip to keep in mind is to try and use a similar width and height. So for example, here we are using Baskerville and here we're using Avenir Book. And you can see here that their X height is quite similar, and so is the X width. So whilst this doesn't always work, it can be a good indicator, similar to the golden ratio rule that we spoke about earlier. When you're still trying to find your feet in working out what looks good, using rules like this can be a good guide. Okay, so that's it for this video. Again, if you haven't checked out the other videos in this graphic design series, then I will link them in the description. There is a playlist over on my channel. I've put some links in the description for places where you can find fonts and typefaces, free, paid. I've also put some links to a couple of websites where you can go on and see fonts in use. This is useful to kind of see how other designers use them and find inspiration for typefaces you want to use. Next week for this series, we will be talking about how you actually choose the typefaces, so stay tuned for that one. And as ever, if you do like the content in this channel, remember to hit subscribe and turn on the little notification bell. I create videos on a weekly basis about photography, design, and creative entrepreneurship. And I'm always open to hearing your guys' suggestions, so drop me a comment and let me know what you want to see on this channel. As ever, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you guys in the next one.